You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250, where we look at events that took place 250 years ago this week. This is from the American Revolution Podcast, and it's just a short bonus episode to remind you about these important anniversaries from the Revolutionary War. This week, we remember the capture of Fort Ticonderoga. At the outbreak of the war, Benedict Arnold was a captain in the Connecticut militia. Shortly after receiving word of Lexington and Concord, he marched his company to the siege of Boston. While he and his men were on the march, Arnold met up with Connecticut Militia Colonel Samuel Parsons, who was also a member of the Connecticut legislature. Parsons was returning from Cambridge to Connecticut, and he stopped to tell Arnold about the situation that he had just seen in Cambridge. The two men discussed the fact that the provincial army was going to need cannons if they wanted any hope of taking Boston by force. Arnold mentioned to Parsons that there were a large number of cannons at Fort Ticonderoga in New York, which the British kept under only a nominal guard. Arnold had traveled to Ticonderoga on multiple occasions as a merchant. The two men parted their ways, and Parsons continued back to Hartford, Connecticut. There he met with Silas Deane, another legislator who had served in the First Continental Congress. On their own, these two men decided to allocate 300 pounds sterling to finance an attack on Ticonderoga. They named Captain Edward Mott to lead the expedition and recruited Heman Allen, the brother of Ethan Allen, to involve the Green Mountain Boys in the fight. Allen at the time was living only a few miles from Ticonderoga. Arnold was unaware of all of this, having just mentioned this information to Parsons on his way up to Massachusetts. He and his men marched to Cambridge, where Arnold witnessed the chaos and confusion that was going on there. Within a few days, Arnold sought out Joseph Warren to discuss his idea of taking Fort Ticonderoga. Arnold told Warren about the cannon and how poorly defended they were. On May 3, 1775, the Massachusetts Committee of Safety appointed Arnold as a colonel in the Massachusetts militia, even though he was already a captain in the Connecticut militia. They did not, however, give him any soldiers. They gave him a few officers and told him to recruit soldiers in western Massachusetts once he got closer to the fort. As Arnold began recruitment, locals told him that a planned attack was already underway. Several Connecticut companies had recently passed through town on their way to link up with Ethan Allen. By the time Arnold heard of this other group under Allen, the men were assembling the local militia for the attack. On May 8th, these men named Allen as the commander of the expedition. After learning about this imminent attack, Arnold rushed to the scene, abandoning his recruitment efforts. On May 9th, he caught up with Allen, who was still assembling the force about a day's march from the fort. Arnold apparently tried to wave around his commission and demand that Allen turn over his men to serve under his command. The Green Mountain Boys, who were of course fiercely loyal to Allen, refused to serve under anyone but Allen, and certainly not some stranger who showed up with no men, no arms, no supplies, not anything but a piece of paper and his own uniform. Eventually, the two officers reached a compromise. Arnold recalled later that the two men would share command. Allen seemed to be more of the mind that, sure, you can come along with us and you can be there when we take the fort, but I'm running the show. The force assembled totaled between 250 and 400 officers and men. Accounts differ on the exact number. Most of them, though, were Green Mountain Boys. Some were Connecticut and Massachusetts militia. The soldiers made their way to the fort, approaching it from the opposite side of Lake Champlain. The plan was to cross the lake overnight and storm the fort before dawn. Allen had sent ahead an advance party to acquire the ships necessary to cross Lake Champlain. On their way, the men of this advance party instead found a cache of alcohol and decided it would be more fun to sit around and get drunk. When the main force arrived late in the evening of May 9th, there were no boats for them. Now, they finally found a small craft that could ferry the men over, but it was getting dangerously close to dawn, and a daylight crossing would likely be spotted, and they would lose their element of surprise. So Allen and Arnold decided to take the fort with the 83 men who had come over in the first two trips. They had no time to wait for another round if they wanted to attack before daylight. Fort Ticonderoga, of course, had a reputation as a great defensive fort. The French had nobly defended it during the French and Indian War, but after the French ceded Canada, the lack of any enemy in the area made the fort unimportant. British Captain William Delaplace commanded the garrison, which had less than 50 officers and men. Like many unimportant garrisons, many of those men were on the invalid list, meaning they were not capable of full duty. They might be sick, they might be old, infirm. They were capable of light work, but not the hard marching and fighting that an active duty soldier might need to do. The garrison had also allowed the fort to fall into disrepair. Several walls had collapsed and had not been fixed. Although British Commander General Gage had sent a few warnings earlier to the commander to be on guard for a possible raid, it appears that the commander had not taken much of any precautions. As the Americans approached the fort just before dawn on the morning of May 10th, they found a small fort door that was unlocked and they rushed inside. Most of the garrison was still asleep in bed. The Patriots overpowered the few guards that they found, and in about 10 minutes they were in control of the fort without a death on either side. Fort Ticonderoga had fallen. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. For more on the story, check out episode 59 of the American Revolution podcast.